Emily, we're not hearing sound. We're getting some in.
I know. I'm sorry, folks. I guess this was not not going to work out. That was a rocky start, but I will give as we come into the it worked on practice. As we come in from the waiting room, I will give a verbal recap of my friend's transgender, which involves a boyfriend and girlfriend talking about a friend who's recently working on their transgender transition. And the boyfriend and his girlfriend discuss it, and then the boy sort of looks within, thinking about his own identity and his friend's identity, and they meet at the end to sort of come to a place of understanding about gender identity. So I'm sorry we didn't get to see that, but the writer and creator is here to chat with us about it later in this thread, so later in this session. So we'll do it then. And so, Christine, I'll let you take it away from there.
Okay. Well, just making sure I'm off mute here. If any of you are part of the Amaze Parents Facebook group, you might recognize me. I do the Amaze Facebook Lives, and actually from this particular group, I've had the honor and delight of chatting with Kay and August in separate broadcasts on that channel, so you might be familiar there. I'm a neuroscientist turned writer, speaker, podcaster, creative director, doer of internet things and content, and I'm just here today. Please mute yourself. We're working on our tech here, but I hear some other voices. And I'm joined by my colleague Emily, who you heard earlier. She is going to be collecting questions. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So also for anybody who is new to Amaze, this is an incredible platform that has been built over the last few years. The flagship is really animated videos for young people about sex education, youth development, healthy relationships, so many topics. There are, I don't know how many videos, definitely over 100, probably close to 200. There is you can watch all of them at amaze.org. There are also YouTube channels, Amaze.org is the youth-facing channel, and then we also have a parent-facing channel at Amaze Parents. So today we are going to be talking about how to support trans young people in our lives. We know that there are a lot of challenges that trans young people face. We also know that there's a lot of misinformation and stigma out there. We've seen some tweets recently, and they have been bad. So this, gender identity has been a priority topic for Amaze to cover from the start. There are lots of videos on the site, including Kay's wonderful video that we'll link up. And we know that this topic, it's on all of us to really provide an inclusive and affirming environment. And so today we're going to talk about that, and we have some really, really fantastic guests who are going to share their wisdom with us. And again, we're really, really grateful for their presence here. Okay, so really quick, before we get started, and I'm going to introduce you to our guest today, I just want to start with a couple of ground rules, really simple. One, be respectful. Disrespectful language will result in removal from the chat, and we don't want to see that happen. So everybody be respectful. And then also, this meeting is captioned. So if you would like to see captions, click the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select Turn on Captions. Okay, and that's it. Pretty plain and simple. Again, if you're just joining us, you can drop, and you have questions first as we go, please drop them in the chat. Emily will be collecting them, and we'll get to the Q&A at the end. Okay, so today we are joined by Dr. Rob Garofalo. He is the head of Adolescent and Young Adult Medicine Division at Children's Hospital of Chicago. Hi, Rob. Can we call you Rob, or is it Dr. Rob? Either one, fine. Okay. Kay Kuipers, who is the writer, director, and animator of My Friend is Transgender. Hi, Kay. How are you? August Clayton, a trans youth activist, who apparently has lots of children running around upstairs from him, but he's here and he's present. It's wonderful. And then Kate Stewart and Jamie Griffith, a mother and son, experienced Jamie's transition together. Hi, guys. Okay. All right, so we are going to dig into the backstories of each of our guests in just a second in a moment through some specific questions I have. But I would just love for our guests to go around and first share your pronouns. Mine are on the screen. I use she, her. And the first time you saw trans identity represented in popular culture. So, Dr. Rob, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm Rob Garofalo.
Thank you.
You hear me? I use he, him, his pronouns. I think the first time I was really cognizant of trans issues in pop culture was when I was a ball boy at the US Open Tennis Championship years ago, and I had to do a match between Renee Richards, who is a transgender identified tennis player, and Martina Navratilova. And the crowd was, pretty vocal against Renee Richards in that particular sporting event, and it really resonated with me and continues to resonate with me as an example of really courage in sports that I think has not generally been sort of acknowledged or recognized.
Okay, sorry about that. I got muted by by the internet, so sorry about that. Okay, Kay, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, my name is Kay. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. The first trans character I think I can remember in popular culture might have been the character Ritsu from Fruits Basket. And it was kind of an imperfect representation, but I think that's probably the first character that I could think of that it wasn't some kind of gag. It was like a character. Ritsu, Fruits Basket. It's an anime.
And how about you, August?
Hey everyone, my name is August Clayton. I use he, him pronouns and they, them in community. The first trans character I ever witnessed was when I was pretty young with the movie Silence of the Lambs. Terrible representation, but definitely my first one. I think their name was Jamie Gum, and they called them Buffalo Bill. That was like the first thing. I didn't have the language to describe who or what or how, anything, but I knew that there was something there.
Wonderful, thanks. And Kate and Jamie.
Great. Hi, I'm Kate. She, her pronouns. And actually, since August mentioned Silence of the Lamb, that might have been my first one too. But then what I actually thought of was The Crying Game, and the character of Dill in The Crying Game is the one that I first thought of. So that's what stuck with me. Jamie?
My name is Jamie. I use he, him pronouns. And I think the first representation of like an explicitly trans person that I saw in pop culture was probably Laverne Cox's character on Orange is the New Black.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for kicking things off. As we can see, there's a lot of variety and representation, some inspiring, some challenging. And now this space has continued to evolve with, character representation. And we know that things are also still really hard. Last week, the inspiration for this broadcast, in fact, was a case in point where an author, a very well-known author, that we're just not going to name on this broadcast, but has been tweeting up a storm of misinformation and stigma about trans people and trans youth particularly. And it's just so damaging. So let's dive right in. I have a bunch of questions. I know you guys will have questions. Start queuing those up in the chat for Emily. And Dr. Rob, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first. I know that you work with trans kids and teens, and I would love for you to share with people like a little window into what the process is like when a family comes to you. When kids realize they're trans, like what are they looking for when they meet with you?
Yeah, so I think it's important. First of all, thanks. And I misunderstood the first question and gave you a popular culture reference, not a character reference. So
anything goes.
Podcast goes on. I think it's important for me to note that there isn't one presentation that that non-binary or transgender children or adolescents like present with. It can really be a range. I mean, there are young people that come in with their parents that have a really strong sense of self and identity, and can be very directive with healthcare providers about what they're looking for and what they want. And then there can be other children or young adolescents or even older adolescents that can come in a little unsure of what they want, or even perhaps of their identity, and are looking for not a bit of guidance in terms of what their identity is, but guidance as to the process. They may have questions about timing. They may have questions about the nuances of the medical interventions. They may not have any knowledge of what the medical interventions are. So, I think we try to provide like a one-stop shopping model where young people can come in with their families and access a full range of different types of services, recognizing that oftentimes it's not one thing that leads them to like pick up the phone and call a provider and make an appointment, and so it could be that they're having problems at home or at school. It could be that they have very specific questions about medical care, medical interventions. But I've learned over the years to like try not to anticipate like what the questions are going to be of the people that walk through my door, and just really be open to sort of hearing each person's individual story as authentic and as important.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And do you find that you end up sort of building that there's like a team approach that ends up happening? Like, do you interface with the school? Is that part of the journey? Or, as you said, it's a very individualized process.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because when we built, when we first built our program, the one piece that we really didn't think about was the school piece, right? We thought about nurses, and we thought about doctors, and we thought about mental health professionals, but we didn't realize that really where most kids, live and breathe and function is in schools. And so Jen Leiniger on our team ended up being like the most important person that we had in our program, because she was the one person that was designed to go into schools and educate them and teach them and sort of move them forward. And what's interesting there is, classic medical providers, we didn't think about like that full range. And really, I would say by and large, that school piece almost singularly was the most important facet of our program with regards to what families actually wanted from us as a medical team.
Very interesting. Yeah. Now, I actually want to keep you on the hook for just 1 second, and I want to ask you to directly respond to a misconception that's out there. Is this a risky process for a young person?
Yeah, the answer to that is largely no and yes. So there are things that we do not know about the process, but these are medical interventions that have been used for a long time now. They've been done quite safely. I know for a fact that the teams that are out there that are doing this work do it with a lot of care and thought and precision. And so, yes, there's not a full range of evidence to support the treatments that we're using, but there is a lot of anecdotal evidence to support it. And the safety data that's coming out really suggests that these treatments can be used both safely and appropriately. And I think the other thing that I try to teach with my patients is that, it's also risky to not move forward with treatment. A lot of parents will come in and really think about like, well, is it safe for me to move forward, like with my child with some of these interventions? And I often, turn it on them in a safe way, but to say like, well, would it be safe for you to not decide to allow your, child to live their life as their authentic selves? And so, the decisions that these parents make, and I consider these parents heroes that really come in with their children, because they really are, in many ways, unsung heroes in this fight for equality for these young people. And they are making decisions with imprecise science. But oftentimes I think it is important to frame it as, that it's an active decision either way, whether you decide to move forward with medical interventions or whether you decide not. And I do think that there oftentimes is not as much risk in allowing your child to really live their lives as their authentic self.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think it's worth mentioning too that even I think in this generation of parents, I mean, there's when you refer to them as heroes, it's like there's so much that's new, and even just terminology and language and understanding about things that I think that's part of the bravery. There is just really embracing and letting your kid be their authentic self and supporting them even through the uncertainty.
Yeah, and I often say that, the medical interventions themselves are not rocket science. I mean, these are medications that we've used in other conditions for many years that have a really strong evidence base. And so I really want to be clear that I believe these medicines can and are used safely. There are things that we don't necessarily understand, like, what are the social impacts of being on the south side of Chicago and socially transitioning your child in middle school or high school? There are things that I think require an added scientific base to inform the way we treat people. But a lot of those things end up to be social as much as they are medical. And so I just really think that it's important for families to recognize that there is a risk in inactivity or indecision, right? Because, what is it to prevent your child, per se, from moving forward along a transition and not allowing them to live their life authentically?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Thank you. And actually, this is a perfect transition because I wanted to ask Kate and Jamie, I'm wondering if you would be able to share a bit about your experience as a trans youth and as a parent, going through this brave journey and coming to where you are now.
You're going first.
Well, I think it's especially like as someone who came out as a young person and transitioned in high school, it's really hard to separate like what we could consider like to be like my gender transition from just like the experience of like growing up and forming an identity. But I think that one thing that particularly characterized the sense of like medical transition and seeking medical care and outside help is how challenging it is for young people for us to just talk about our bodies and our experiences with peers, in relationships with our parents anyway. Like that's an awkward thing to talk about your body and like the things that your friends are doing as, a 14, 15, 16-year-old or as a middle schooler. And then to have, sort of the added stigma that surrounds transition. I think it can be really difficult to open those conversations with parents. And I am really grateful that I think like I have always had the privilege of having a really open relationship with my mom. So that made conversations around transition, whether it was social and like wanting to go by a different name and pronouns, or whether it was medical, seeking like hormone replacement therapy and top surgery. It allowed me to come in with a base level of comfort. But I know that like even I was pretty uncomfortable at times just trying to find the language to describe my body and talk about it with someone who you don't necessarily like always feel comfortable talking about your body because you're an adolescent.
Yeah. And I say, as a mom, as Jamie was going through his sort of gender affirmation process, there's just a lot of emotions, and allowing myself to feel those was really important. I think at first there was, fear, quite frankly, just fear of the unknown, that our family was changing and not knowing what that change would actually be like was a big part of it. There's also this fear because, no matter how loving your family is or your community is, being trans is hard in our world. And that's why we're all here today. And so as a parent, anything that's going to make your child's life harder is really hard for you. And then there was the guilt, honestly, when Jamie told me, of thinking like, oh, should I have known this sooner? Like, should I have seen something? Because would it have been easier if he had transitioned earlier in adolescence? And so there was that. But I have to say, going through all of those emotions and acknowledging them were far surpassed by the love and happiness of when seeing Jamie really just come into himself and be himself. And I think that what Rob said, is just so true. It's like I know for many families, not knowing where this is going can be scary, but you also have to ask the question of what happens if your child doesn't do this. And honestly, after even starting the hormones, and particularly after the top surgery, and again, everybody has to go on their own journey, and know when things are right for them. But I think the best thing in my life as a parent was that first summer going to the beach and seeing how happy Jamie was, playing in the water, being with his sister, and just being free.
So wonderful. Thank you for sharing so candidly. Yeah, wow. Okay, August, I want to move on to you because, we've had the pleasure of chatting before, and you do so much work and so much good work. So I would love for you to talk a little bit. We've been going, sort of from medical to family, and now I would love for you to talk about your activism around trans issues and kind of how that developed.
Yeah. So I started organizing my first year in college. I am 22 now. I'm supposed to be 23 in a couple of days. But I started at an HBCU around electoral politics and everything, and just figuring out where my politics lie. And in that, I think I learned a lot more about myself and who I was. And once I transferred schools, essentially, I just started going to our GSA weekly groups, and I was just like, I don't think I'm an ally. I was like, I think something's up. And I had roommates who were very open and extremely communicative about their experiences with gender and sexuality, and I was trying to figure out why aren't more folks as vocal about LGBTQIA issues on my campus. And I just kind of jumped right into that in terms of in the intersections of being Black and queer. So a lot of that meant having targeted programming and everything within my institution, which led me into Advocates for Youth, figuring out how to leverage power outside of my school to get the things that I need, which meant gender neutral housing, all gender restrooms, all of the things. And as I developed my politic around I guess intersectionality and all these different frameworks, it was really just about trying to figure out where I want my people to be in the next decade. And for me, that means I want Black trans folks to be alive. So after I took it outside of the institution, it became more about who I'm asking myself questions who is doing this work to sustain the lives of my people? And is that in direct service? Is that in legislative issues? So I kind of wanted to put my hand in every single pot. And then I had a Black trans elder tell me you can't be the jack of all trades. So you have to figure out something what is your interests? And a huge thing for me ended up being education. Because as a low income student, I've had to drop out of school because I couldn't afford it. I'm back in school now, about to get my degree, luckily. But I know so many Black trans folks who haven't even had the opportunity to get their foot in the door. So a really good comrade of mine and I had some conversations, and she founded this organization called the Francis Thompson Education Foundation, brought me on as the co-executive director. And what we do is essentially just give direct scholarships to Black trans scholars who are seeking to fund their education, be it in divinity, the academy, what is it called? I think like massage therapy, just all these different things, and offering mentorship and convenings, because for me, it's more than just what happens after we get my people housing, what happens after we get them food and all of those things. We need to be able to get them jobs. And for me, that looks like having access to an education and also being able to stay in school. So right now, my organizing and involvements is all around that. before it was like HIV prevention, treatment, education, and it's still like all of the things can like intersect, but a big part of my live stream has been about Black trans survival. So yeah.
That's amazing. Also, yes, and I believe you used the word just at some point in that description, and it's totally not just. So that's amazing. Okay, so Kay, I want to turn to you for a few minutes here. And Emily's going to link up the video, or we can link it up later for your award-winning video, I should point out. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about working on that video and the origin for it, and basically, did it live up to how you were envisioning it at the very beginning?
Well, I don't know how to start with that. I mean, writing it and storyboarding it and animating, the whole process of getting it made was interesting because I was only out to maybe a handful of people when I started working on it. And I think I came out to the people I was coordinating with at Amaze as my kind of impassioned pitch to do that subject. But like even in the credits of the animation, it has my birth name in the credits because I wasn't totally out. So working on it helped me even to feel more comfortable with where I was, and anyone that I tried to reach out to for feedback on it. It was really an emotionally rewarding experience getting it done. And then once it was out there and being able to see the reaction that it was getting from kids and parents was really moving. I'm not sure if I hit everything that you asked.
Yeah. And you had, as I recall from our earlier conversation, did you have friends who were directly voiced by some of the characters? I feel like I remember that from our conversation.
Yeah. So the two, well, there are, I guess, three central characters in the cartoon, which is Jim, who's the cisgender boyfriend character. Cassie is his girlfriend. And then Glenda is the transgender character. And I did the voices for Jim and Glenda, but my friend Kayla Miller, was actually probably the first person that I had come out to when I was in high school. So it was kind of an emotional experience just recording the dialogue with them. And my friend Jake Stanton did the music for the cartoon, and he was someone that I had known since high school. And when we started working together on the project, I wasn't out to him, but by the end of it, I was. And it spurred some interesting conversations between him and some other people as he was like working on it on his own. And it came at a pretty interesting time in my life, and I think in the lives of a couple other people that were working on it. I mean, we were in production of it throughout the 2016 election, to give us some context. So it felt more important by the end of it.
That's incredible, and what a testament to the creative process for sort of helping or facilitating the journey. That's really incredible, and knowing a little bit, digging into that backstory a little more, kind of adds levels of meaning for me. Viewing that whenever I view that video again. Dr. Rob, I want to come back to you and just talk a little bit more about some of the most common. I know you said earlier the point at which people come to you, everybody's going to be on a different journey. They'll have different needs. But what are some of the most common concerns that you hear from parents and young people when they come to you and sort of are asking questions, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, I mean, most of the young people that come in are wanting to figure out like how fast they can get on hormones and what's the safest process to do that. I mean, I would say 80% of the young people that come are often really activist in their mindset and come dragging their parents to the medical visit. I'm sure I see Kate nodding her head, where a lot of the time these young people know what they want and they are trying to move the process along as fast as possible. And the counterweight to that is the parents who are often coming in with questions about how can this be done safely? Is this really the right decision? And so it's really a bit of a puzzle to put the pieces together to make sure that you're, meeting the patient's needs, but also like moving the parents along in sort of a, not always a linear manner, but in a way that continues to get them educated so that they feel comfortable, with the decisions that they're about to make. Because the truth is that these young people need their parents' support to be well and to do this well. And so it's our job as pediatricians to make sure that the entire family unit in some ways, hopefully, moves forward in an ideal situation in a way that feels supportive and nurturing. So it's usually the young person comes in knowing exactly what they want and us trying to navigate a process of having that done safely and really allaying parents' fears. I mean, sometimes parents will come in and be like, what is I want to make sure that my young person that my child's really trans, can you help me with that? And I'll turn to the child and be like, yeah, so, what gender identity do you have? There's no form, there's no scale, there's no psychological battery of tests that needs to be done. Really, the young person can answer that question for themselves. And sometimes that's news, I think, to parents, that, think that they're going to come in and have this evaluation that is going to help determine their child's gender identity, when really our work sometimes is just getting them to recognize that anyone's gender identity, be it trans or otherwise, is a normal variation, and it's not an affectation. It's just a normal part of the human condition. And I think going back to your question about the author, for me, that was the real problem with that author's statements. And I'm going to not use the name since you told me not to, but I felt my mother raised me to, never sort of talk about, communities that I'm not a part of or don't represent, and so I think my problem with that author was that she got way out of her lane in spewing misinformation in a way that was very fear-mongering and othering and ignorant, at its core. And it was really, I think, disrespectful of her own celebrity. She knew full well what she was doing with those tweets and was way out of her lane and should just sit down and stick to what she knows best and not, get in the way of young people and parents that are really seeking care from places that really do this well and do it with a lot of care and nurturing alongside the science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here. Well, I find your comment about, I kind of love when you were saying that young people come in and they know what they want, right? Because it sort of, it affirms even my experience. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think you're right. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I feel like one of the most heartening things, and I'm also a parent of a teen, but is that this generation, they know what they want, they're activists, and it's amazing. So actually, I wanted to turn, and that actually leads me to another question that I wanted to pose to Kay, August, and Jamie, whoever wants to answer, or all of you, is where is that, wherever you are in that, sort of knowing what you wanted as a young person, where was that information coming from, right? So you see what I mean? I'm just curious about that journey, for you guys, and where you were finding that sort of strength of spirit and strength of, identity in the first place.
I certainly can only speak for myself in terms of where information specifically on medical transition and gender affirmation came from, but I think certainly a lot of internet communities was really formative for me, in the sense that it was how I accessed a lot of not only base information of this is what transition could look like for you, but also I think in a broader sense narratives of transness, which is maybe not necessarily a net positive thing to just be rogue on the internet as a 14-year-old, but I think that through watching other people transition publicly on social media, that was a way that I really formed an idea of like what I thought my transition should look like, and how I could possibly like come out and could possibly, really find a home in my own body.
August or Kay, do you have anything you want to add? Totally.
Sure. Could you repeat the question one more time, just so I'm sorry?
Well, I'm so struck by Dr. Rob's comment about how young people come in and they know what they want. And when I think about myself as a teenager who is like largely clueless about everything, medical or otherwise, it's so impressive to me, especially around, something as big as identity. So I guess I was just curious, Jamie was talking about, topic-driven chat rooms and things like that. But I'm just curious about like where you started seeking information and how it all sort of started to gel.
So for me, like I said, like I started asking the questions once I started attending my former universities, LGBTQ organizations, and kind of like Jamie said, the chat rooms and everything. I remember Tumblr at one point was so vital for me to really understand, like, wow, I can choose my own name. And for me, it became a very spiritual journey. Like some folks say it's like a social transition, but now I'm leaning towards like this the spirituality of all of that. So I moved off of Tumblr and kind of centered myself in all of my experiences, in terms of just my life, my lived experiences, all of that. And then I started going to groups. I think I might have mentioned this in another webinar, but I went to like a trans masculine POC group, and at the beginning of the group, everyone had like their own goal, and everyone's was like, I want to have top surgery by the end of this group. I want to start T. I want to have my legal transition finished. And mine was, I want to be able to come out to my mom. Wasn't even thinking about about medically transitioning because I thought it was just impossible, being from such a small town. But here I am, like 3 years later, out and all of those things. But it really started by definitely those questions and was fueled by Tumblr. And I think all meshed together by being around folks who are actually like living their authentic selves.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
He raises a really good point here about like that there are different ways of moving forward in this process. I think sometimes young people do come in and they know what they want, but what they want here is a medical intervention and they want hormones. And sometimes it's important to like really work with a young person to see like what are their expectations around what those medical interventions are going to do, right? Because sometimes there's a disconnect. Sometimes young people may come in and believe that, well, if I can just start T or if I can just take estrogen, then all the problems in my world are going to magically like disappear. And that's not the reality for most trans people, if not all trans people. And so sometimes the most important thing that we can do as healthcare providers is really think through what he was describing, what are like objectives that go along with, pursuing life as your authentic self that might not necessarily relate to per se surgical or medical interventions, and really to work on focusing on a bit of reality checking, in terms of the work that needs to be done outside of like a clinic visit in terms of living your life, to its full extent in a happy and healthy way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, was there anything you wanted to add? Otherwise, I do have a different, well, yeah, go ahead.
I would like to add something. I mean, I think I'm a little bit older than Jamie and August, and I think just in the last 10 years or so, the culture has changed a lot on this. There's a lot more resources available, and it's really exciting to hear how they found online communities and communities in their schools and Tumblr and stuff like that. And honestly, when I was younger, that I didn't have that. When I tried to look up online resources, it was mostly stuff that did not make me feel very good about myself, and I mostly felt like I had to keep secrets and be ashamed of myself. I mean, I think it did help me, though. It's interesting. I think it was August mentioned the spirituality to this, and I think I came to sort of Buddhist ideas without knowing they were Buddhist ideas of the self and the body being that you are not your body, and that was kind of how I would comfort myself. That I just knew that to try to counteract the dysphoria, that I could kind of go into my own mind in that way. That's not exactly great advice. It was a defense mechanism, but it took me a long time to even come out to myself and not be ashamed of it, and which really I was helped by in my when I was maybe 24, I think. I made some friends when I was living in Boston, in the queer community in Boston, that they took me to some events, and I wasn't even out to them. I think they just maybe sensed an energy about me that they thought that I needed to be there. And I only came out to my parents last year. So I'm still figuring out my way forward, and I sometimes feel like, because I'm a little bit older, I'm 30, that I missed the boat on some things, but it's really exciting to see how the culture's shifting. And I know sometimes it feels like the culture's not shifting fast enough, but to me, that's really inspiring that there are younger people that aren't that much younger than me that had a different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, I'm curious to hear from you. Having heard from these amazing. Okay, you're still young to me. I'll just say, but how was your experience when you and Jamie were first starting this process? Was there did it feel like a big space between your expectation of, okay, here's what we're going in for, and then what Jamie brought to the table for what the goals were? I'm just curious about. I'm still so struck by Dr. Rob's comment about how certain people are about what they want, and I think that's amazing. And so, just from the parent lens, was there anything that surprised you when you guys went in for the first time?
No, not the first time. I mean, I'll say what probably leading up. I don't know if it was years or before. Jamie talked to us about wanting to transition. I think that was the harder part because we saw, he wasn't happy with who he was. And so as a parent, that was really hard to see your child trying to figure things out and watching them and giving them the space to do that. And at the same time, not quite knowing exactly where things were going. And I think when he sat us down and talk to us about changing his name, his pronouns, and wanting to, go see a doctor and explore hormone therapy, then it was like things just, at least for me, started to click into place. Because it was like, oh, all right, like this is, and he came to us with, I don't know if you did actually a PowerPoint, but it was pretty close to it in terms of here's what, here's the printout, here's what I think we need. And, and I think as Rob said, we were incredibly lucky to find great doctors. And that to me is I cannot imagine having gone through this as a family without having an amazing set of doctors that we were able to find along the way. It makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. It's wonderful. So Kay, I wanted to come back to your video. You were just saying a minute ago that sort of your journey of discovery, there wasn't as much support, and that the things that you would read online weren't so great at the time. And I know that even from our Facebook Live that we did, even when some, crazy people would start commenting in a not so nice way, you were just so civil and wonderful. And so I wanted to talk to you, or just hear from you a little bit about, transphobia, what it felt like to write it into the video that you created, and how have you managed to stay like high road, and address, people's stigmatizing beliefs, and being so respectful along the way? Is that just, maybe it's just who you are? I don't know.
Well, I think anyone who is trans or has any kind of marginalized community, I think they maybe develop the skills to deal with things like that just because they have to. It's funny that I didn't know if you were going to mention those comments, but I guess whatever algorithm was promoting our interview on Facebook Live, it ended up on a lot of people's timelines, so they didn't want it there. And I emailed, I forget exactly who I was emailing about it, and just said, like, should I respond to this? I don't. And eventually, I think all the comments just got removed or hidden, which was not my impulse. I felt like I should have. I think you called them. I think they were someone in the email chain said that they were trolls and not to feed the trolls. But I don't know if they were trolls. I think their feelings were earnestly felt, and I think it's not like they were trying to rabble rouse. It's that they saw something that went against what they understood, and they didn't know how to process it. And I think not just with gender issues, but all sorts of political and social issues, I've confronted things like that within my family and within my community growing up for my whole life. And I think it's helpful to understand that when people are seemingly closed-minded and seemingly resistant to a new idea, it's that it's challenging something that they understood to be how they understood the world, and that can be really upsetting and challenging. And you can imagine things in your own life that maybe you didn't understand or you misunderstood, and how upsetting it can be when the rug gets pulled out from under you. So I think being able to have the patience and empathy to deal with that is helpful. I will say it's not great. It shouldn't be asked of trans youth to be able to fight those battles on their own, which is why I think it behooves trans adults and allies and educators and medical professionals to be able to step in and fight for them. But yeah, that's a skill that I think I developed just as a result of life. In the cartoon, I know we didn't get to watch the clip of it, but the central character is Jim, who is the cisgender character, and he kind of is. I think he comes off as really closed-minded and mean, but I hope by the end of the video, the audiences kind of see that he actually is thoughtful and has an internal life, and he's just processing information. And I think it's worth realizing that everyone's having an internal life, and you might not understand someone else's, but that doesn't mean that they don't have one. It's exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for your grace in that. And actually, your comment is actually segueing very perfectly into sort of my next round of questions. And I also wanted to ask Emily or let you all know that Amaze has a really great short video on how to be an ally. And, to Kay's point, this is all of our work to be doing. So Emily, if you have a second, you could drop that in the chat and you can bookmark it for later. So I do want to, ask each of our guests. I'll start with Dr. Rob. I want to sort of dig into based on your different lanes of expertise, to talk about how we can really support the trans community, young people especially. And Rob, what do you think you would say, to pediatricians, your colleagues? What are sort of the top ways, even just a couple top ways to support trans kids and their families?
Yeah. When I think about what the core function of a pediatrician is, for any child, whether or not they identify as trans or not, it's really to promote the physical, social, and sort of mental well-being of a child. And I think really the work with trans people is just grounded in a general, mantra of what it means to be a healthcare provider and a pediatrician. I think sometimes some pediatricians hear like, oh my God, it's a trans youth, and they get skittish as if all of a sudden they need a separate set of skills. And what they really just need to do is like take a breath and listen and go back to the core, skill sets that they groomed in their training that led them to go into pediatrics in the first place. I mean, most pediatricians, most adolescent medicine providers, I'd like to think most healthcare providers are really grounded in wanting to make their patients, lead healthy and happy lives. And it's really that simple, although it may sound complicated. I think it wasn't too long ago where access was the main problem, right? These young people didn't have places to go. I had families that were traveling 8-10 hours to get to my clinic, as there were only a few places across the country that were doing this well. That has fundamentally and dramatically changed, as folks have already alluded to on this call. But there are now places really in, most states, if not all states around the country, where young people can access, very high quality care. And so I hope the discussions we now begin to have as healthcare providers or advocates is as much about quality as it is about access, right? We've fought and need to continue fighting needing to continue to fight the battles around improving access. But I also think the trans community needs to continue to advocate and demand the highest quality of care, because that's a piece of the equation that I think has sometimes gotten lost in the fight for access, right? And those two things are a little separate. But, for a healthcare provider, it's really just about listening and going back to your core beliefs and skill sets that led you to a health profession in the first place. This is not rocket science. It's just called being a good pediatrician.
Yes. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. So Kate and Jamie, I would love to hear from you. What would be your top recommendations for really how to create a strong family support system, for trans kids and youth? What does that look like to you guys?
Yeah. So I think, just to echo what Rob said, part of it is just being a good parent and listening to your child. And I'd lay on two more things to that. One is realize that this is not about you as a parent. It's just, if you get your feelings hurt because your child decided to go talk to aunt or so-and-so or a cousin, and that was the first person they confided in, as Jamie said before, sometimes we don't have good shared language around these issues. And so you got to get over yourself a little bit and just be happy that they were able to find that other person to share that with and have that conversation. And so as you're going through this, put your own ego aside and realize this is really about your child and what they need. And then the other thing is, don't expect your child to be the expert overnight, even though, as Rob and I said, they come prepared and they know a lot, but they're not necessarily the expert on everything than trans. And so, and that's and they don't want, I speak for Jamie, but he can say this if he wants, but every conversation your family has doesn't then have to revolve around that. And so I think, as adults, we also have to know, we can get on Google, we can get on the internet too and get some answers and have conversations with our kids. But it's important that we're also not falling into that, every conversation then we have, we're expecting them to provide us with all the answers as well.
I love you, Kate. You're awesome. Jamie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think kind of relating to what my mom said, both then and before about fear. I think also understanding that while when it comes to transition, the stakes can feel like incredibly high, because as like the decision to come out as trans, to transition in any way that looks like for you, does come with a lot of implications in terms of social status and physical safety. But I think a lot of times people, like Rob was saying, they get caught up in sort of the fear of like dealing with transness, and particularly I think when it comes to transition, this fear of like the stakes must be so high because I'm so afraid of it, that like were my child to like change their mind, were they to have different thoughts, or just like every young person is like be confused, find misinformation, like that could be the end of the world. And I think challenging parents to and healthcare providers and teachers to kind of take a step back, and realize that this like fear of transness that we have is because we have a society that is transphobic, but not because that there's anything inherently bad with gender nonconformity or indecision. And if ultimately someone decides that hormones for just a year is what they need, or that they need different supports than they thought they did originally, then that's like not the end of the world, and it's no reason to not trust your child in the future, or trust your student, or the person that you're a care provider for.
Such a wonderful point. Thank you. I just want to remind folks that I just have some quick final closing questions for Kay and August, but then we're going to open it up for questions. So if you do have questions, please drop them in the chat. Emily is going to be teeing up those questions for us in just a few moments. So Kay, I would like to know what you were talking about kind of everybody stepping up to the plate, and I had mentioned the How to Be an Ally video. In your opinion, what is one of the best things that people can do to support a trans friend in their lives?
Well, I think kind of just that, being able to speak on behalf of not just your own interests, but for people who are not you. And I mean, that's not just related to transgender issues, that's related to all sorts of issues. I think a recent Facebook Live event you did, I forget their name, but it was like a high school journalist.
Yes, last week, Geneve, yeah.
She mentioned that how maybe straight people should have to come out straight. And I think that's an interesting idea, because I think if everyone had to maybe sit and think about their identity and their orientation, maybe that would feel less alienating and stigmatizing. Mm-hmm. So I think what people can do to be a good ally is, just to have tough conversations with your own family, or with people that you work with, or anyone that when you hear something abhorrent, say something. That's,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. And August, I'd like to close, with you, our activist. What are one or two key ways that you feel that people can really, step into the ring and advocate for the rights of, trans young people? Dr. Rob was saying, we all have to kind of stand up and get in there. And what would your recommendation be as a youth activist?
I think it really depends on your role. I know I keep forgetting the person who made it, but there's this kind of chart where it's like your role in a social change ecosystem. I recognize mine was a storyteller, but there's like just different parts of that. And I think if you just look that up, if someone could put that in the chat, that'd be cool, because that is an amazing place to start. Also, another very direct way is to give funds to specific organizations who you can trust, who are doing the work, like on the ground grassroots orgs. Another thing I think internally that I'm grappling with is being around my family specifically, and how we're all operating within the same system that taught us that to be cis is to be normal, and to be heterosexual is to be normal, and all of that. And I'm with youth now, like folks who are younger than me, my younger siblings, and it's really about changing the way I speak around things. When I'm asking like who they're dating or like how they identify or any of those things, it really doesn't have an expectation that I'm expecting my younger siblings to be cishet. So I think the internal work is ridding yourselves of the narrative, the rhetoric that really only focuses on the majority, and bring the margins to center. So that's like one thing. Second thing, obviously, when you want to go like the actual like route, definitely tapping into organizations like Black Youth Project 100, BYP 100, the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, the Okra Project. Like, these are wonderful organizations who are hosting webinars and tutorials and trainings, and also Advocates for Youth. I will not forget about my own org, who are hosting like amazing trainings that are focusing specifically on the survival and wellness and health of trans people, specifically Black trans people, trans folks of color. And I think that's a great place to start. A lot of my journey ended up being like going to these meetings and these webinars and taking the notes and asking myself the questions. And before I decided like, yes, I can lead my own conversation about this. It took me years to be able to speak on behalf of or alongside, or I'm not a voice for the voiceless. I don't believe in that, but I do think it's really important that we have our own, like are able to teach ourselves about it before we can walk around and say like, I'm advocating for X, Y, and Z, and possibly saying the wrong thing. I'm really big on redistributing our wealth, like really big on that, especially right now in a social change climate where we're talking about accountability. I love talking about like restorative justice, transformative justice, which is a really big thing right now. So if you go to like transformharm.org, I think there's just some great resources that, like, when we're talking about like misgendering people or these things that when we have these missteps, it's a great idea to figure out how you can atone for some harm or hurt feelings that you might have. I'm just like going straight off the top of my head. But yeah, basically like a lot of that is just like internal work. Outward facing work is obviously redistributing our wealth and figuring out how to tap into the organizations who are doing the work. And then after that, obviously be in community with trans people, because I don't think it's enough to just like work for or work alongside. Like, when was the last time that you've honestly like figured out or cared about what if a trans person ate today, if you have anyone in your circle who's even trans, like all of these things I'm asking of myself with all like marginalized identities, and not in a tokenization way, but just in like, I don't want a group of people, I don't want my community to all look the same. So yeah, that's all I have.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I just was noticing a bunch of people asking about resources. I think Emily's going to be pulling those together. There were a lot of incredible, throughout the broadcast that have been shared. So thank you for that. I guess we're going to move to questions. First, I got to just like thank this incredible panel. You guys, I mean, there's more amazingness to come. You're going to have to answer more questions, but you guys have been so awesome. And this has been just truly like wonderful and an honor to talk to you. Emily, do you want to serve up some questions?
One question we had was for Dr. Rob. I just want to say my own handwriting on my notes is terrible, so if I get someone's name wrong, I just really apologize. But the question was, what are some other? It's from Mary. Are there programs like yours around the country, and how can folks find them?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And I guess I want to take a step, as we're not coming to the close of this panel. I'm thinking back to some of the questions that were asked, and if you need a better example of the power and of letting people live their lives authentically, look at the three amazing people we have on this call. I mean, sometimes I'm just really blown away by young trans people and the way they can articulate their lived experiences and their reality to a world that has largely been hostile. And so kudos to all three of you for just being amazing human beings. I'm just really proud to share this panel with all three of you. Yeah, I think that there are places generally now. It's funny, when I first started this program, the own head of my hospital was like, do we really need a program like this? And I was like, I think you do. You know, I'm like, and if you do this now, you'll be a leader in the field. But if you don't, soon everybody will want one of these. And now, like, I would say most children's hospitals in the country, you know, have worked to develop programs around gender. And so I do think that HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, used to have a sort of a resource on their website, which helps direct people. The Gay and Lesbian Medical Association has a provider directory. I think the one thing that I know about trans communities, particularly trans youth communities and their parents, is they are often very networked. And so, not that I'm a big fan of like Yelp or those types of reviews, but you can use social media to help connect you if you're a parent or a child wanting resources by using social media. I do think, you know, going back to my comment about like access versus quality for both parents and young people, I would be discerning shoppers and make sure that the places that you're choosing to get your healthcare from and at are affirming and welcoming. There are options. If folks on this chat find none of those solutions helpful, people can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to help, you know, try to connect people. That many of us that do this work, it's more than just a job. It's part of our lives, and so you know, I think helping to connect people is part of that. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. And then I'm going to unmute real quick. So I'm unmuting folks as I ask the question. The next question was for August, Kate, or Jamie. We have a lot of educators in the group today, and they wondered what's something what's the first thing you want to hear from an educator, or would have wanted to hear from an educator. I'll just leave it at that. What's something you wanted to hear or would have wanted to hear from an educator?
Just in general, or
a way they could affirm your identity, or if you were out in school and so on.
I don't know. That's very difficult to answer because I don't know that they would have had any way to say anything. Well, I don't know. Maybe just affirming that transgender was a real thing would have been nice. But
August or Jamie, would you?
Yeah, Emily, my flip side to that question would be, you know, to Jamie or August too, is did you have any educators in your lives who were those, you know, were really stepped up and were affirming and wonderful, and how did they do that made that the case?
Yeah, I have several people in my house, just letting y'all know. But my biggest thing with educators was definitely having the space for them to ask me, like, you know, like, what pronouns do I use in this space? Because I wasn't out in every single space. So, like, what pronouns am I using in this classroom versus, like, if I see you somewhere, like, with my family? And then after that, it was, like, mostly around, like, I guess, like, the, like, syllabus. I don't know, like, what kind of age we're talking about, but, like, when it comes to syllabi, I think mostly, like, trying to figure out, like.
Oh, August, you're muted.
We lost you. Hold on. I'm unmuting.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. What we're supposed to be learning in syllabi. I know, like, with my African American literature course, my professor was really big on having trans-specific literature, and in that, like, just like representation. So that was like really hard, I think, to find, especially in like AFAM literature. And then moving around that was just like conversations around like anything around gender. We just definitely didn't want to like make sure that we wanted to make sure that there wasn't just like one specific narrative going on in every single classroom. But I think my biggest thing has always been about pronouns, about names, like first day kind of vibes. Like it was really hard, I think, to want to like raise my hand and say like, you got the wrong name or you got the wrong pronoun.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, did Jamie have something to add? I can't tell if you're muted or not.
Yeah, I had sort of one other thing. I really agree with what August was saying about creating space for kids to like be able to express their name and pronouns like comfortably. And I actually, when I'm not being a trans kid, I work in early childhood education and am currently getting a bachelor's degree in education. So this question really resonates for me as someone who's not only been trans in high school, but like wants to go back to being trans in high school as an educator. And I think that one of the things that I like to do with the kids that I work with now, and I think works for any age, is like returning the autonomy for students to identify themselves and giving kids a choice and saying like how you express, like what pronouns you want to use, like how you identify is your choice. Like that's the language that I use around my preschoolers and young people, is like you decide whether or not you're a boy or a girl. And I think, there's a lot of things that like build into narratives of transness, and whether or not like gender is innate is certainly something that's like very like discussed within our community. But I think letting kids know that they have the choice to self-determine, like August was saying, like giving them the room to say their name and pronouns, but letting them know that it's also like completely up to them. And it's a decision that they get to make, I think is really important too.
Yes, I definitely agree. The next question I think might be for Kate or Dr. Rob or both. So I'm asking to unmute you. It has to do with when kids or young people are at the beginning of their journey, and to our perception, it seems like they don't know what they want, or we regard them as maybe like shifting their perception of their identity. So how do you navigate that, and how do you sort of live with it, I guess, in a world where we want absolutes and that kind of thing?
Well, I think first that you have to live with the fact that the world isn't about absolutes or certainties. And I think it's, as Rob and I talked about before, we're talking about being, a provider for a trans child or a parent. And the fact is like, there's so many things we face as being a parent that either may change or may challenge us to think about differently. And this is just, this is not every child, goes through this, but there are so many things our children go through as they're growing up. And I think we need to approach it the same as we would other situations. It's a little different because of course, the stigma and everything else around in the world, but it's just, those skills and those things about being a good parent, really listening, letting your child lead, and putting front and center, like their happiness is really important. So.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what was just said. I think it goes back to my first question, which is my first answer, which was that there's not one way to sort of present as trans. And, some people come in very directive and they know what they want, and other young people don't, And so I think one of the keys, and I think misconceptions is, people think that gender affirming care is pushing in a directive way towards one possible outcome. But those that do gender affirming care well are doing just that. They're like affirming a young people and a family as to where they're at, and they're working with them to find their own path and their own conclusion. That's, you as the medical, if a medical provider thinks they have the answer, then they're the wrong medical provider, right? The answer lies within, the young person and the family, and so your job as a healthcare provider is to just sort of help them along that path to find the answers and the solutions that feel authentic and healthy for them. And that, I think, is often the trick. And we haven't really talked a lot about sort of the gender non-binary, but that's where I think some of the absolutes can come into play and can be really challenging, I think, even with regard to the provision of medical care. But again, the solution doesn't lie in a healthcare provider or a healthcare system or even a parent in being directive or pushy. It's in being affirming. And I think that distinction is like really important.
Yeah, thank you. So I think there's one last question, and it kind of relies on your experience, so I'm not sure anyone on the call has this experience, but it pertained to how can we get started organizing for trans considerations and rights in our schools and other public spaces. And I wasn't sure if anyone here had experience with that. I will send out a list of resources for that after this webinar from Advocates for Youth and other organizations, but I'll just let anyone jump in if they've dealt with that in their school or their community. Actually, let me just unmute all of our panelists just in case.
Were we talking about colleges or like?
I think any environment.
I mean, for me, most of my organizing started in a private Catholic Jesuit institution. So that was like the hardest type of, I guess, trans-specific organizing I've done. But it really started with like communicating with administration. Like, this is what I want. Like, this is what needs to happen. This is what's missing. Can we have that, please? And obviously, you get a no, depending on what the issue is, especially when it's to do with trans liberation. And then you build a campaign. And I think Advocates for Youth really, really helped me with that. Specifically, like student organizing, I figured out what I wanted. And before I even joined Advocates, I reached out to one of the student organizers who had secured all gender housing at their Jesuit institution. And it was a lot about like communications, I guess, with administration, and then moving on to like climate studies, surveys, and it all depends on what your funding looks like. Because if your school doesn't have the money for X, Y, and Z, like there are a lot of, like, you're going to get a lot of runaround from things. But I think having a team of folks who are just as dedicated in administration, in the student body, and as well as like staff would like really help push a campaign forward. But it definitely depends on like what it is that you want to do. So I guess my follow-up question would be like what the campaign is, and then moving around like how you could strategize around it.
Yeah, I think that is a fair response. Okay, so I'll send around all the resources and everything that we discussed here after the call, and that's the end of my list of questions that can be addressed here, Christine, and I'll throw back to you to take us out.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to, thank you again to our panelists, and I wanted to just give you an opportunity if there was any key message or rally cry or call to action or anything that you wanted to share today before we close out, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to do that.
Could I say something?
Of course.
I know we're trying not to say this author's name.
Why don't you rhyme it? You can rhyme it with something.
KJ Bowling.
There we go.
So I saw a lot of people in the aftermath of her like long blog post or whatever you would call it, people that felt either guilty for their love of the book series or the movies, or people that were saying, like, I separate the art from the artist. And I don't think people should feel guilty. And I also think it's lazy to say I separate the art from the artist, because you only do that if you find the artist reprehensible. Like, you wouldn't do that for like Van Gogh or something like that. That's you automatically want to associate the art and the artist because that informs the art. So I think it's worth, which we have to do with a lot of old pieces of media, not just with regards to gender, but probably more prevalently in regards to race, reassess what it was that what we're responding to from that work. And what does that say about your own perceptions? What were you willing to overlook? What were you willing to excuse? And maybe you only value that artist as a craftsman, and it's not that you're taking anything away from it, but you probably are taking something away from it. And that's not even necessarily reprehensible, because I don't think KJ was sitting there writing Barry Botter, like thinking about like, oh, what transphobic subtext can I put in this? I think she was, writing something that she cared about. And that's what maybe you were responding to. She's fallible, and she's using a platform to say really harmful things. But people are complicated and it's messy. And if those books meant something to you, if they were life affirming for you, which I know for a lot of queer people, particularly, I think those books were really powerful. I don't think you should have to rewrite your life story to say, I never liked it anyway. I think it's healthy to be introspective about the content that you consume and what it means with a broader context. I just wanted to say that.
Anyone else on that? Thank you for that. Again, very graceful response. Any of our other panelists have a final, comment or anything they would like to say?
Yeah, I'll dovetail off that very quickly. For me, I loved those stories and those movies and those books. And for me, as a queer person, they were stories of like love and acceptance and belonging, and even for the other, right? It was about hope and courage. There were a lot in those books and those stories that I felt were very empowering as a gay man and as a queer person. And so it's a shame that I think that author then tried to take those things away from trans people through, I think, very hurtful social media posts and blogs. And so again, I would just reiterate that there's no question that she's way outside of her lane. And I would just encourage folks to continue to get their information from experts, such as the people on this panel, and from other people that know what the hell they're talking about. And it's really that simple. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Huge rounds of applause. I'm throwing confetti to all of our panelists today. You were wonderful. We, I believe, are going to try to load this recording to Facebook and also to YouTube so that people can access it later. And Emily is going to be sending out resources. If you want to learn more about Amaze, we would love that. And you can do that at amaze.org. I mentioned our YouTube channels earlier. The one with all of our youth-facing videos is Amaze.org, and the parent-facing one is Amaze Parents. And we're on Facebook at Amaze Parents and on Twitter at Amaze.org. I think we were originally going to play My Friend is Transgender on our closing, but because the internet hates us, we're not going to do that. So I encourage you to go check the link out because it is really a wonderful video. And honestly, I just wanted to close by thanking all of the participants today who you all took the time to show up and to learn and to listen. And that is one of the most beautiful and brilliant things you can do, especially amidst a global pandemic dumpster fire. So we thank you for that. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.